The autumn wind carved through the maple trees of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, carrying with it the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter's approach. October 13th, 1979, dawned crisp and clear, the kind of morning that made the suburban streets shimmer with frost-kissed dew. In the quaint neighborhood of Elmwood Drive, where white picket fences divided manicured lawns and children's bicycles lay scattered across driveways, the Kellerman family home stood as a testament to the American dream. Theodore Ted Kellerman, 34, had built his life with the precision of the mechanical engineer he was. His hands, calloused from years of working with machinery at the local steel plant, had also crafted the wooden swing set in his backyard and the flower boxes that adorned his front porch. Ted possessed the kind of quiet strength that anchored families, a man who fixed broken faucets without complaint and read bedtime stories with theatrical voices that made his children giggle until their stomachs ached. His wife, Victoria, 29, moved through their home like a gentle breeze, her auburn hair catching the morning light as she prepared breakfast for their family. Victoria had abandoned her teaching career when their first child arrived, but her intelligence manifested in the way she organized their household, managed their finances, and turned their modest three-bedroom house into a sanctuary of warmth and love. She hummed while she cooked, her voice carrying melodies from the radio that played softly in the kitchen. Their children completed the portrait of domestic bliss. 11-year-old Jeremy possessed his father's analytical mind and his mother's gentle spirit. The boy spent hours building elaborate structures with his erector set, creating miniature worlds that defied the boundaries of childhood imagination. His room overflowed with model airplanes suspended from fishing line, their wings casting dancing shadows on walls covered with maps of distant countries he dreamed of visiting. 8-year-old Melody lived up to her name, her laughter like wind chimes in a summer breeze. She collected smooth stones from the creek behind their house, painting them with watercolors to create tiny masterpieces she gifted to neighbors and teachers. Melody possessed the fearless curiosity that drove her to befriend every stray cat in the neighborhood and ask questions that made adults pause and consider the complexities of existence they had long forgotten. The youngest, 4-year-old Nathan, toddled through life with the unbridled joy that only small children possess. His chubby fingers left smudges on windows as he pressed his face against the glass to watch birds, and his infectious giggle could brighten the darkest moments. Nathan spoke in a mixture of real words and invented language that somehow his family understood perfectly, creating a secret code of love that bound them together. On that October morning, the Kellerman house hummed with typical weekend activity. The aroma of coffee mingled with the sweet scent of Victoria's homemade cinnamon rolls, while the distant sound of Saturday morning cartoons drifted from the living room where the children had gathered in their pajamas. Ted sat at the kitchen table, spreading butter on toast while scanning the morning newspaper headlines about the Iran hostage crisis competing for space with local high school football scores. "The Hendersons invited us to their barbecue tomorrow," Victoria mentioned, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Her movements were fluid, economical, honed by years of managing breakfast for 5 people in a kitchen barely large enough for 2. Ted looked up from his paper, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "That sounds nice. Jeremy's been wanting to see their new telescope." Through the kitchen window, Victoria watched Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, tending to her rose garden despite the season's end. The woman moved slowly, her arthritis evident in the careful way she pruned the last stubborn blooms. Victoria made a mental note to bring her some cinnamon rolls later, a small gesture of kindness that exemplified the compassionate spirit that made the Kellermans beloved in their community. The morning progressed with the comfortable rhythm of family life. Jeremy helped his father rake leaves in the backyard while Melody and Nathan jumped in the growing pile, their squeals of delight echoing across the neighborhood. Victoria captured the moment with their Polaroid camera, the instant film developing into a treasure she would slip into the family album, a collection of memories that documented their journey from newlyweds to the family of 5 they had become. As afternoon approached, Ted announced his intention to drive to the hardware store for supplies to fix the back porch steps. The wood had begun to sag under years of children running up and down, and with winter approaching, he wanted to ensure their home remained safe and secure. "Take Jeremy with you," Victoria suggested, wiping flour from her hands with a kitchen towel. "He's been asking about how joints work in construction." Ted smiled, proud of his son's curiosity. Jeremy had recently discovered that his father's engineering knowledge extended beyond the factory floor, and the boy hungered for understanding about how things connected and supported each other, whether in bridges, buildings, or the intricate machinery that filled Ted's workplace. They left around 2:30 in Ted's blue Ford pickup truck, a reliable vehicle that had served the family faithfully for 6 years. Jeremy sat beside his father, his legs swinging from the bench seat as he bombarded Ted with questions about load-bearing walls and foundation principles. Their voices faded as the truck disappeared around the corner of Elmwood Drive, leaving behind the sound of children playing and the steady rhythm of suburban Saturday afternoon. Victoria remained home with Melody and Nathan, planning to use the quiet time for baking bread and perhaps starting the evening's pot roast. She moved through her kitchen with the confidence of someone who had found her rhythm in life, measuring ingredients by feel and timing everything with an internal clock that rarely failed her. At approximately 3:15, according to later witness statements, a white van turned onto Elmwood Drive. Mrs. Patterson, still working in her garden, noticed it because delivery trucks rarely arrived on weekends in their neighborhood. The van moved slowly, as if the driver was searching for a specific address, before parking 3 houses down from the Kellerman residence. 2 men emerged from the vehicle. Both wore dark clothing and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. Mrs. Patterson later described them as average height and build, but admitted her eyesight wasn't what it used to be. She watched as they approached the Morrison house, which stood empty while the family vacationed in Florida. When they began walking around the property's perimeter, she assumed they were contractors hired to perform work while the owners were away. The men spent approximately 20 minutes examining the Morrison property before returning to their van. Mrs. Patterson went inside to prepare her afternoon tea. Glancing occasionally through her kitchen window, she noticed the van remained parked on the street, but the men were no longer visible. At 4 o'clock, Ted and Jeremy returned from the hardware store, their truck bed loaded with lumber, screws, and the tools necessary for the porch repair project. Jeremy carried a small bag containing the washers and bolts his father had allowed him to select, his face glowing with pride at being included in such an important task. Victoria greeted them at the front door, Nathan clinging to her leg while Melody announced that she had completed a painting of their house that looked exactly like real life except with purple trees. The family gathered in the kitchen where Victoria served fresh cookies and milk, the domestic scene playing out with the comfortable predictability that characterized their Saturdays. As evening approached, the family settled into their usual routines. Ted began organizing his tools in the garage while Victoria started dinner preparations. The children played in the living room, their voices creating a soundtrack of childhood that neighbors had grown accustomed to hearing drift from the Kellerman house. At approximately 6:30, Mrs. Patterson noticed the white van was no longer parked on Elmwood Drive. She couldn't recall seeing it leave, but assumed the men had completed whatever business had brought them to the neighborhood. The details seemed insignificant at the time, just another forgettable moment in the quiet tapestry of suburban life. Dinner that evening followed the family's established pattern. They gathered around the dining room table, a wedding gift from Victoria's parents that had witnessed countless meals, birthday celebrations, and quiet conversations that built the foundation of their shared life. Ted carved the pot roast while Victoria served vegetables, and Jeremy helped Nathan cut his meat into manageable pieces. Melody entertained them with stories about her school friends and plans for Halloween, just 2 weeks away. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Jeremy's upcoming science project, Melody's desire to learn piano, and Nathan's fascination with the neighbor's new puppy. These were the moments that defined the Kellerman family, ordinary instances of connection that created extraordinary bonds of love and understanding. After dinner, they moved to the living room where Ted read to the younger children while Jeremy worked on homework at the dining room table. Victoria cleaned the kitchen, humming softly as she washed dishes and prepared for the week ahead. The house settled into evening quiet, the kind of peaceful atmosphere that made neighbors walk past and think about the importance of family, the value of home, the security that comes from belonging somewhere special. As bedtime approached, the family performed their nightly rituals with practiced ease. Ted helped Nathan brush his teeth while Victoria read Melody a chapter from The Secret Garden, their current bedtime story. Jeremy, old enough for more independence, read in his room until his parents came to say goodnight and turn off his light. By 9 o'clock, the Kellerman house had settled into darkness, except for the porch light that Ted always left burning, a beacon of welcome that had become his signature, a small gesture that neighbors appreciated and that made Elmwood Drive feel safer, more connected. Mrs. Patterson, preparing for bed herself, noticed the soft glow from the Kellerman windows gradually disappear as the family retired for the night. The street settled into its typical weekend quiet, broken only by the occasional car passing through and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees that lined their suburban sanctuary. At approximately 11:30, according to police reports filed weeks later, a neighbor 3 blocks away reported hearing what sounded like a vehicle backfiring. The sound was brief and unremarkable, the kind of mechanical hiccup that characterized the aging automobiles common in working-class neighborhoods. No one investigated, and the night returned to its peaceful rhythm. Sunday morning, October 14th, dawned gray and overcast, with the promise of rain hanging heavy in the air. Mrs. Patterson rose early, as was her habit, and noticed that the Kellerman porch light remained on despite the daylight. This struck her as unusual, since Ted was meticulous about turning off lights to conserve electricity, a habit born from his engineer's efficiency and the practical necessity of managing a family budget. As morning progressed into afternoon, Mrs. Patterson realized she hadn't seen any activity from the Kellerman house. No children playing in the yard, no sounds of weekend projects, no Victoria hanging laundry on the clothesline that stretched between 2 maple trees in their backyard. The silence felt strange, unsettling in a way that Mrs. Patterson couldn't quite articulate. By evening, concern had transformed into worry. Mrs. Patterson approached the Kellerman front door and knocked firmly, calling out Victoria's name. No response came from within the house, despite lights burning in several windows. She tried the doorknob and found it unlocked, another unusual detail, since the family typically secured their home, especially at night. Mrs. Patterson stepped inside, calling out greetings to the family. The house felt wrong immediately, not disturbed, exactly, but empty in a way that suggested absence rather than sleep. She moved through the rooms carefully, her heart rate increasing with each empty space she discovered. The living room appeared normal, with children's toys scattered across the carpet and Ted's newspaper folded on his chair. The kitchen showed signs of the previous evening's dinner, a pot still sitting on the stove, dishes in the drying rack beside the sink. Everything suggested a family that had simply paused their routine temporarily, as if they had stepped outside for a moment and would return shortly. But as Mrs. Patterson climbed the stairs to the second floor, the wrongness became more pronounced. The bedrooms contained rumpled sheets and clothes laid out for the next day, but no family. Nathan's stuffed elephant, his constant companion that never left his side during sleep, lay abandoned on his pillow. Melody's partially completed painting sat on her desk, watercolors still damp as if she had been working on it recently. Mrs. Patterson's hands trembled as she reached for the telephone in the master bedroom. She dialed the operator and requested immediate connection to the police, her voice shaking as she tried to explain that her neighbors had vanished from their home, leaving behind all their possessions but no trace of where they had gone. The first police officers arrived within 15 minutes, their patrol cars flashing lights drawing curious neighbors from their own homes. Officer James Caldwell and his partner, Officer Ray Donnelly, began their initial investigation with the methodical approach required by potential missing persons cases. Their preliminary examination revealed a mystery that would haunt law enforcement for decades. The house showed no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle or violence. Personal belongings remained untouched. Victoria's purse sat on the kitchen counter with $43 in cash. Ted's wallet lay on his dresser containing his driver's license and credit cards. The family car remained parked in the garage, keys hanging on their hook beside the kitchen door. More puzzling still, the family's suitcases remained in the bedroom closet, and their clothes filled the dressers and wardrobes. If the Kellermans had left voluntarily, they had taken nothing with them. No clothing, no money, no means of transportation. It was as if they had simply evaporated from existence, leaving behind the shell of their life but taking their essence with them. Officer Caldwell documented every detail with growing unease. His 15 years of police work had exposed him to numerous missing persons cases, but none quite like this. Families who fled in the night typically took essential items, clothes, money, important documents. Families who met with foul play usually left behind evidence of violence or disturbance. The Kellerman house presented neither scenario. It existed in a state of suspended animation, as if time had stopped at the moment the family disappeared. Breakfast dishes remained in the sink from Saturday morning. Victoria's shopping list for the upcoming week sat magneted to the refrigerator. Jeremy's homework lay completed on the dining room table, ready for Monday's school submission. As news of the disappearance spread through Millbrook, residents gathered in small groups on sidewalks and front porches, their conversations filled with speculation and fear. The Kellermans represented stability in their community, the kind of family that anchored neighborhoods and made other residents feel secure. Their inexplicable vanishing sent ripples of anxiety through a town that prided itself on safety and predictability. Detective Frank Morrison, no relation to the neighbors whose empty house had attracted the mysterious van, arrived to take charge of the investigation as darkness fell on Sunday evening. Morrison possessed the weathered appearance of a man who had spent 23 years confronting the darker aspects of human nature, but the Kellerman case immediately struck him as different from anything in his experience. Morrison's initial walkthrough of the house reinforced the officer's observations. Every room told a story of interrupted life. Board games left mid-play in the living room, a load of laundry sitting damp in the washing machine, Nathan's bath toys still floating in the partially drained bathtub. The evidence suggested the family had been present Saturday evening and had vanished sometime during the night, but without explanation or apparent cause. The detective's years of experience had taught him to look beyond the obvious, to search for details that others might miss. In the master bedroom, he noticed that the bed appeared slept in on both sides, suggesting Ted and Victoria had gone to sleep normally. In the children's rooms, sheets were disturbed in patterns consistent with natural sleep movements rather than struggle. Morrison's flashlight beam caught something that made him pause in Nathan's doorway. On the floor beside the 4-year-old's bed lay a single muddy footprint, larger than any that would belong to family members, pressed into the carpet with enough force to leave a clear impression. The print appeared recent, the mud still slightly damp despite the house's warmth. This single piece of evidence transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into something far more sinister. Someone with muddy shoes had been in Nathan's bedroom after the family disappeared. Someone who had no legitimate reason to be there. Morrison carefully photographed the footprint from multiple angles, his mind racing with implications that chilled him to the bone. As Monday morning arrived, the Kellerman case exploded across local media and began attracting attention from state and federal authorities. A family of 5 doesn't simply vanish without trace, leaving behind a mystery that challenges fundamental assumptions about safety, security, and the predictability of suburban life. FBI Special Agent Diana Reeves arrived in Millbrook on Tuesday morning, bringing with her resources and expertise that the small-town police department lacked. Reeves, 36, had built her reputation investigating cases that defied conventional explanation: kidnappings, organized crime, and domestic terrorism incidents that required thinking beyond traditional parameters. Her first meeting with Detective Morrison revealed the full scope of the mystery facing them. Not only had the family disappeared without explanation, but their investigation had uncovered troubling additional details. Canvas interviews with neighbors revealed that the white van observed on Saturday had returned Sunday night, parking briefly in front of the Kellerman house before departing quickly when another neighbor's dog began barking. More disturbing, examination of the muddy footprint in Nathan's room revealed that whoever had made it possessed knowledge of the house's layout. The print was positioned exactly where someone would step to avoid the loose floorboard that creaked when pressed, a detail that suggested either extended surveillance of the family or insider knowledge of their home's characteristics. Agent Reeves established a command center in the Millbrook police station, bringing in additional federal resources to process evidence and coordinate the expanding investigation. The case had begun attracting national attention, with reporters arriving from Philadelphia and New York to cover the story of the family that had simply vanished. As the investigation deepened, more questions emerged than answers. Financial records showed no unusual activity in the family's accounts. Ted's employment history revealed a model worker with no conflicts or problems. Victoria's background check uncovered nothing more controversial than overdue library books. The children had no involvement in anything that would attract dangerous attention. Yet someone had made the Kellerman family disappear with precision that suggested planning, resources, and motivation that remained completely mysterious. The investigation was just beginning, but already it was clear that this case would test the limits of law enforcement's ability to solve crimes that existed outside the boundaries of normal human behavior. The house on Elmwood Drive stood empty now, its windows dark except for the investigators' flashlights that swept through rooms like searching spirits. The home that had once resonated with laughter and love had become a crime scene, its silence more haunting than any scream. 45 years later, that silence would finally be broken, when construction workers renovating the Morrison house made a discovery that would reopen the case and reveal truths more shocking than anyone had dared imagine. But in 1979, as autumn deepened into winter, the Kellerman family remained simply gone, leaving behind only questions that seemed to have no answers, and a community forever changed by the recognition that some disappearances defy all explanation. The investigation was just beginning, and already it was clear that some mysteries run deeper than anyone wants to believe. The third week of October brought an early frost to Millbrook, coating the remaining autumn leaves with crystalline edges that caught the morning light like shattered glass. Inside the temporary FBI command center established in the basement of the police station, Agent Diana Reeves spread crime scene photographs across a folding table, each image a piece of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with every passing day. The muddy footprint from Nathan's bedroom had yielded surprising results. FBI laboratories in Philadelphia confirmed that the soil composition matched earth from a quarry located 17 miles southeast of Millbrook, a detail that meant nothing to local investigators but sent a chill through Agent Reeves. The same quarry had appeared in 3 other missing persons cases across Pennsylvania over the past decade, cases that remained unsolved and bore disturbing similarities to the Kellerman disappearance. Detective Morrison entered the makeshift command center carrying 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder thick with witness statements. His weathered face showed the strain of sleepless nights and growing media pressure, but his eyes remained sharp with determination. 23 years of police work had taught him that some cases defined careers, and he sensed the Kellerman investigation would be one of those watershed moments that separated competent investigators from truly exceptional ones. The soil analysis came back from the lab, Reeves said, without preamble, accepting the coffee with a nod of gratitude. The footprint contains traces of limestone, clay, and iron ore, a combination that's specific to industrial quarrying operations. There are only 4 active quarries within a 50-mile radius that match this composition. Morrison set his folder on the table and leaned against the concrete wall, his expression grim. "I have been thinking about that white van." Miss Patterson's description was vague, but she mentioned one detail that stuck with me. She said it looked official, like a government vehicle or utility truck. What if we are not dealing with random criminals? The suggestion hung in the air between them, carrying in implications that neither investigator wanted to voice directly. In 1979, public trust in government institutions remained shaken by recent revelations about domestic surveillance programs and covert operations. The possibility that the Kellerman family's disappearance involved official agencies opened doors to investigative paths that could lead anywhere or nowhere. Agent Reeves pulled out a map of Pennsylvania and marked the locations of the 4 quarries with red pins: Hanover Limestone, Berkshire Industrial Minerals, Crawford Stoneworks, and Titan Excavation. I have requested background checks on all employees and contractors associated with these operations. If someone with access to these sites is involved in multiple disappearances, we need to identify them quickly. The investigation had expanded beyond the boundaries of small-town police work, drawing resources from state and federal agencies that brought both expertise and bureaucratic complexity. FBI technicians had processed every surface in the Kellerman house for fingerprints, finding dozens that belonged to family members, friends, and regular visitors. More concerning, they had also found 3 partial prints that didn't match anyone in the known database, evidence that unknown individuals had been inside the home at some point before or during the family's disappearance. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a forensic psychologist contracted by the FBI, arrived that afternoon to develop a profile of whoever was responsible for the Kellerman's disappearance. Hendricks possessed a reputation for seeing patterns that escaped traditional criminal investigators, her academic background in behavioral analysis providing insights that often proved crucial in complex cases. Her initial assessment, delivered in the police station's conference room, painted a disturbing picture of calculated planning and methodical execution. Whoever orchestrated this disappearance possesses sophisticated knowledge of surveillance techniques, timing, and logistics, she explained, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of someone accustomed to analyzing humanity's darker impulses. The absence of physical evidence suggests either exceptional skill in evidence removal or access to resources that most criminals don't possess. Dr. Hendricks spread behavioral analysis charts across the conference table, each graph and diagram representing aspects of criminal psychology that she had identified in the Kellerman case. The choice to leave the house completely undisturbed except for taking the family suggests this wasn't motivated by robbery or passion. Someone wanted these specific people for reasons we haven't yet identified. Detective Morrison studied the psychological profiles with growing unease. His experience with local crime had prepared him for domestic violence, theft, and occasional drug-related incidents. But nothing in his background had equipped him to understand criminals who operated with the precision and resources that Dr. Hendricks described. What kind of person has the capability to make 5 people disappear without leaving traditional evidence? Morrison asked, his voice revealing the frustration that had been building throughout the investigation. Dr. Hendricks adjusted her glasses and consulted her notes before responding. Either someone with extensive training in covert operations, military, intelligence, or law enforcement background, or someone with access to resources that provide the same capabilities. The level of planning required suggests this wasn't an impulsive act, but rather the culmination of extended surveillance and preparation. As November approached, the investigation had generated thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and forensic analyses, but the Kellerman family remained as mysteriously absent as they had been on that first Sunday morning when Mrs. Patterson discovered their empty house. Media attention had intensified, with reporters from major newspapers and television networks descending on Millbrook to cover the story that was capturing national attention. The pressure took its toll on the small community. Parents began walking their children to school and organizing neighborhood watch groups. Hardware stores reported increased sales of deadbolt locks and security systems. The comfortable assumption that Millbrook was a safe haven for families had been shattered by the recognition that even the most ordinary suburban neighborhoods could harbor unimaginable dangers. Agent Reeves established a tip line that generated hundreds of calls from across the country. Most proved to be false leads or well-meaning but irrelevant observations, but several calls provided information that added new dimensions to the mystery surrounding the Kellerman disappearance. A truck driver calling from Ohio reported seeing a white van matching the description traveling westbound on Interstate 80 during the early morning hours of October 14. The van had been followed by a dark sedan, and both vehicles had exited at a rest stop where the driver observed what appeared to be a transfer of passengers from one vehicle to the other. The truck driver hadn't thought much of it at the time, but the news coverage of the Kellerman case had triggered his memory of the unusual late-night encounter. More significantly, a former employee of Titan Excavation contacted the FBI tip line with information that sent the investigation in an entirely new direction. Robert Castellano had worked as a security guard at the quarry until being fired 6 months earlier for what his supervisor called inappropriate curiosity about company operations. Castellano claimed that Titan Excavation was involved in activities that extended far beyond legitimate mining operations. They were moving things at night, Castellano told Agent Reeves during a clandestine meeting at a diner 40 miles from Millbrook. Equipment coming and going in unmarked trucks, meetings with people who didn't look like they belonged in the mining business. When I started asking questions, they found reasons to get rid of me. Castellano's allegations painted a picture of criminal activity that could explain the sophisticated planning behind the Kellerman disappearance. According to his account, Titan Excavation served as a front for smuggling operations that moved everything from stolen goods to illegal weapons through a network that extended across multiple states. The quarry's remote location and industrial infrastructure provided perfect cover for activities that required secrecy and security. The boss, Vincent Torino, had connections with people from Philadelphia and New York. Castellano continued, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the diner's relative privacy. Serious people who didn't appreciate questions or curiosity. If someone crossed them or learned too much about their operations, they had ways of making problems disappear permanently. Agent Reeves felt the familiar chill that accompanied major breakthroughs in complex investigations. Castellano's information provided the first plausible explanation for the resources and expertise required to orchestrate the Kellerman family's disappearance. If Titan Excavation was indeed a front for organized criminal activity, then the family might have inadvertently discovered something that put them in danger. But what could a mechanical engineer, a former teacher, and 3 young children have learned that would threaten sophisticated criminal operations? Agent Reeves knew that investigations often revealed connections that weren't apparent initially, and she began exploring possible links between Ted Kellerman's work at the steel plant and the industrial activities centered around Titan Excavation. The steel plant where Ted worked, Millbrook Industrial Manufacturing, had contracts with several local quarries and mining operations, including Titan Excavation. Plant records showed that Ted had been involved in designing and maintaining equipment that was used in extracting and processing materials from quarry operations. His engineering expertise would have given him detailed knowledge of industrial processes that most people never encountered. More troubling, employment records revealed that Ted had recently submitted reports questioning irregularities in equipment specifications and material deliveries related to the Titan Excavation contracts. His supervisor, Harold Winkowski, had dismissed these concerns as minor clerical errors, but Agent Reeves suspected that Ted's engineering background had enabled him to identify discrepancies that others might have missed. Ted was meticulous about documentation, Winkowski explained during his FBI interview. He had this habit of double-checking everything, making sure specifications matched actual deliveries and usage. Most of us figured it was just his engineering training, But sometimes he had found errors that saved the company money or prevented equipment failures. Agent Reeves pressed for more specific information about Ted's recent concerns regarding Titan excavation. Did he mention anything unusual about their orders or delivery schedules? Winkowski shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his expression suggesting reluctance to share information that might reflect poorly on his supervision. Ted thought their equipment requests didn't match their stated mining operation. He said the machinery they were ordering was designed for deeper excavation than their permits allowed. But Vincent Torino explained that they were planning expansion projects, so I told Ted not to worry about it. The interview revealed a pattern that made Agent Reeves suspect the Kellerman family had stumbled onto information that connected them to criminal activities they couldn't have imagined. Ted's analytical mind and attention to detail had led him to identify discrepancies that could expose the true nature of Titan Excavation's operations, making him and his family potential threats to people who eliminated problems with ruthless efficiency. Further investigation into Vincent Torino's background confirmed Castellano's allegations about organized crime connections. FBI records showed that Torino had been suspected of involvement in several criminal enterprises over the past decade, including illegal weapons trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. However, he had never been successfully prosecuted due to lack of evidence and the sophisticated methods he used to insulate himself from direct involvement in criminal activities. Torino operated through a network of legitimate businesses that provided cover for illegal operations, using his quarry as a hub for activities that generated millions of dollars in untraceable income. His organization employed individuals with military and intelligence backgrounds who possessed the skills necessary to conduct surveillance, intimidation, and elimination of threats with professional precision. The revelation that the Kellerman family might have been targeted by organized crime fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. Agent Reeves coordinated with FBI organized crime task forces in Philadelphia and New York, bringing additional resources and expertise to bear on a case that had evolved far beyond a simple missing persons investigation. Surveillance of Titan excavation began immediately, with FBI agents monitoring the facility around the clock using techniques designed to avoid detection by security-conscious criminals. The quarry's remote location and sophisticated security systems presented challenges, but the federal agents possessed equipment and training that enabled them to observe activities without alerting Torino's organization to their presence. Within a week, surveillance confirmed Castellano's allegations about nighttime activities at the quarry. Unmarked trucks arrived after dark, carrying cargo that was transferred to underground storage areas excavated far deeper than legitimate mining operations required. The facility buzzed with activity that had nothing to do with limestone extraction, transforming into a criminal logistics center when darkness provided cover from prying eyes. Agent Reeves obtained warrants for wiretaps on Torino's communications, hoping to intercept conversations that would provide direct evidence of his organization's involvement in the Kellerman disappearance. The wiretaps revealed a sophisticated criminal enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate corporation, but focused on activities that ranged from theft and fraud to kidnapping and murder. However, the intercepted conversations also revealed that Torino's organization was aware of law enforcement interest in their activities. References to cleaning up loose ends and relocating sensitive materials suggested that they were taking steps to eliminate evidence and prevent further investigation into their operations. Most chilling, one intercepted conversation between Torino and an unidentified associate included references to the family problem and confirmation that it had been handled permanently. The conversation was cryptic enough to avoid direct admission of guilt, but experienced investigators recognized the coded language that criminals used to discuss activities they couldn't risk describing explicitly. Dr. Hendricks analyzed the intercepted communications and provided psychological insights that deepened the investigation team's understanding of how Torino's organization operated. These individuals display characteristics consistent with professional criminals who view violence as a business tool rather than an emotional response, she explained. They eliminate threats with the same detached efficiency that legitimate businesses use to handle problematic contracts. The psychological profile suggested that the Kellerman family had been targeted not because of personal animosity, but because Ted's discoveries posed a business risk that required elimination. In Torino's world, a mechanical engineer who asked too many questions represented the same type of problem as a rival criminal organization or an undercover law enforcement agent, a threat to be neutralized with whatever methods proved most effective. As December arrived, bringing with it the first snowfall of winter, the FBI investigation had assembled a comprehensive picture of criminal activities that explained how and why the Kellerman family had disappeared. However, the question of where they had been taken and what had happened to them remained unanswered, leaving families and friends to endure the agony of uncertainty that was often worse than confirmed tragedy. Agent Reeves knew that organized crime figures like Torino rarely left witnesses to their most serious crimes. The family's complete disappearance suggested an outcome that she couldn't bring herself to voice, even in official reports. But professional obligation required her to pursue every possible lead, including the slim hope that the family might still be alive somewhere within Torino's network of criminal enterprises. The investigation expanded to include facilities and properties connected to Torino's organization across multiple states. FBI agents conducted searches of abandoned buildings, remote warehouses, and unused mining sites, looking for any trace of the missing family. Each search yielded evidence of criminal activity, stolen goods, illegal weapons, drug processing equipment, but no sign of the Kellermans. Winter deepened around Millbrook, covering the town in snow that muffled sounds and created an atmosphere of hushed anticipation. The Kellerman house stood empty, its windows dark except for the security lights that police had installed to prevent vandalism. Neighbors walking past on their way to work or school invariably slowed their pace, perhaps hoping to see some sign of life that would indicate the family's miraculous return. But the house remained silent, holding its secrets with the patience of stone. Inside, investigators had removed items for forensic analysis, leaving behind empty spaces that somehow made the family's absence more profound. Children's artwork still decorated the refrigerator, and family photographs smiled down from walls, creating a shrine to lives interrupted rather than concluded. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had first discovered the family's disappearance, struggled with guilt and fear that consumed her daily routine. She had installed multiple locks on her doors and began sleeping with a baseball bat beside her bed, haunted by the recognition that she had been living next to danger without realizing it. Her rose garden, once a source of pride and joy, remained untended beneath the snow, its dormant state reflecting the suspended animation that had settled over the entire neighborhood. The investigation continued into the new year, but leads were becoming scarcer and the trail was growing cold. Torino's organization had adapted to law enforcement pressure by reducing activities and implementing additional security measures that made surveillance more difficult. The criminal network demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that enabled it to survive law enforcement attention and continue operating despite increased scrutiny. Agent Reeves faced the possibility that the Kellerman case might join the growing file of unsolved disappearances that haunted her career. The family had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only questions and the lingering fear that justice might remain forever beyond reach. But she also knew that some investigations required patience measured in years rather than months, and that persistent effort sometimes revealed truths that initial investigations missed. The case would remain active, with periodic reviews and follow-up investigations that continued for decades. New technologies would be applied to old evidence, fresh perspectives would examine familiar facts, and the slow grinding of law enforcement persistence would chip away at the secrets that protected Vincent Torino and his criminal organization. 45 years later, when construction workers renovating the Morrison house made their shocking discovery, The truth about the Kellerman family would finally emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for nearly half a century. But in 1980, as winter gave way to spring and then summer, the investigation seemed destined to join the ranks of mysteries that defied resolution, despite the best efforts of dedicated investigators. The house on Elmwood Drive waited with the patience of the innocent, holding its secrets until time and circumstance would finally reveal what had really happened to the family that had vanished into the darkness of an October night, leaving behind only love and the hope that someday, somehow, truth would emerge from the silence that had consumed 5 lives. The investigation was entering a new phase, one that would test the limits of persistence and the power of secrets, to endure across decades of searching for answers that seemed to exist just beyond the reach of justice. The summer of 1983 brought a breakthrough that seemed to validate years of investigation, only to crumble under scrutiny like sand through desperate fingers. FBI agents raiding a warehouse in Camden, New Jersey, discovered documents that appeared to reference the Millbrook situation and payments made to individuals identified only by code names. Agent Diana Reeves felt the familiar surge of hope that accompanied potential breakthroughs, but experience had taught her to temper optimism with caution. Vincent Torino's organization had proven remarkably resilient, adapting to law enforcement pressure with the fluidity of water finding its way around obstacles. Each time investigators thought they had cornered him, new evidence emerged that shifted the focus elsewhere, creating a frustrating pattern of near misses and dead ends that characterized complex organized crime cases. The Camden warehouse raid yielded boxes of financial records, encrypted communications, and evidence of criminal activities spanning multiple states and years. FBI forensic accountants worked for months to decode the financial trails, hoping to find concrete evidence linking Torino to the Kellerman disappearance. What they discovered instead was a criminal enterprise far more sophisticated than initial investigations had suggested. Torino's network operated through dozens of shell companies, legitimate businesses, and offshore accounts that moved money and resources with the complexity of multinational corporations. The Millbrook situation, referenced in the Camden documents, could have referred to any number of criminal activities in the area, from drug trafficking to illegal weapons sales. Without additional context, the references remained tantalizingly ambiguous. Detective Morrison, now promoted to lieutenant and approaching retirement, had watched the Kellerman case consume resources and careers, while yielding frustratingly little concrete progress. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had seen too many families destroyed by crimes that defied resolution, and he struggled with the recognition that some cases remained forever beyond the reach of justice. "We know they are responsible," Morrison told Agent Reeves during one of their quarterly case reviews. "We know how they operate. We understand their methods, but knowing and proving are different animals entirely. Torino's too smart to leave evidence that would hold up in court." The investigation had revealed the scope and sophistication of Torino's criminal empire, but proving his involvement in a specific crime required evidence that his organization was expertly trained to eliminate. Professional criminals who had survived decades of law enforcement attention understood how to insulate themselves from direct connection to their most serious crimes. Agent Reeves had been promoted twice during her work on the Kellerman case, her expertise in organized crime investigations making her valuable to operations across the eastern United States. But the missing family remained a personal obsession that she revisited whenever other cases allowed, driven by the recognition that 5 innocent people deserved justice, regardless of how much time had passed. The mid-1980s brought technological advances that promised new approaches to old evidence. DNA testing, while still in its experimental stages, offered the possibility of identifying genetic material that traditional forensic methods had missed. Agent Reeves arranged for re-examination of evidence from the Kellerman house using techniques that hadn't existed during the original investigation. The results were both promising and frustrating. DNA analysis confirmed the presence of genetic material from 2 unknown individuals in the house, evidence that corroborated earlier fingerprint findings about uninvited visitors. However, the technology was too new to provide matches with existing criminal databases, leaving investigators with proof that strangers had been in the house but no way to identify who they were. More significantly, the DNA evidence confirmed that whatever had happened to the Kellerman family had occurred inside their home rather than elsewhere. Blood traces too small to have been detected by 1979 forensic methods were found in the basement laundry room, suggesting that at least one family member had been injured during whatever events led to their disappearance. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, now in her 50s and recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in criminal psychology, updated her behavioral analysis based on the new DNA evidence. Her revised profile painted an even more disturbing picture of calculated violence carried out by individuals with sophisticated knowledge of evidence elimination. The blood evidence suggests that the family was subdued inside their home before being transported elsewhere. Dr. Hendricks explained to the investigative team, "The minimal amount of blood indicates restraint rather than lethal violence, which suggests they were taken alive. However, the complete absence of subsequent evidence suggests that their captors had predetermined plans for permanent elimination." The psychological profile reinforced Agent Reeves' conviction that the family had been killed, but it also raised the possibility that they had survived the initial abduction. Professional criminals sometimes kept victims alive for interrogation, leverage, or simply because immediate elimination wasn't convenient. The hope that the Kellermans might have lived for days, weeks, or even months after their disappearance added another layer of anguish to an already tragic case. As the 1980s progressed, the Kellerman investigation became a case study in law enforcement academies, illustrating both the capabilities and limitations of criminal investigations involving sophisticated organized crime. Agent Reeves frequently lectured to new FBI recruits, using the case to demonstrate how criminals with sufficient resources and training could challenge even the most dedicated investigative efforts. Vincent Torino continued operating his criminal empire throughout the decade, his organization adapting to law enforcement pressure while expanding into new areas of illegal activity. FBI surveillance documented his involvement in drug trafficking, illegal weapons sales, money laundering, and contract violence, but prosecutors struggled to develop cases that could survive the sophisticated legal defenses that Torino's wealth enabled him to purchase. The criminal justice system's requirement for proof beyond reasonable doubt became a shield that protected Torino from consequences, despite law enforcement's certainty about his criminal activities. Judges and juries needed concrete evidence rather than circumstantial connections, no matter how compelling the overall pattern might be. By 1990, the Kellerman case had been officially redesignated as a cold case, though Agent Reeves continued reviewing files whenever new evidence or techniques became available. The family's house on Elmwood Drive had been sold to new owners who renovated it extensively, trying to erase the tragic history that made it difficult to market to families with children. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s, remained in her house next door, having become an unofficial guardian of the Kellerman family's memory. She maintained contact with Victoria's parents and Ted's sister, sharing information about the investigation's progress and ensuring that the family's disappearance wasn't forgotten by a community that had largely moved on from the tragedy. The elderly woman had installed a security system that would have been considered excessive for Millbrook's quiet streets, her home bristling with cameras and motion sensors that reflected the lasting fear that the Kellerman case had instilled in surviving neighbors. She knew too much about how quickly safety could become illusion, how completely ordinary families could vanish without explanation. The 1990s brought advances in computer technology that enabled investigators to cross-reference information with unprecedented speed and accuracy. Agent Reeves, now a senior supervisor in the FBI's Organized Crime Division, oversaw the digitization of the Kellerman case files and their integration into national databases that might reveal connections invisible to earlier investigations. Computer analysis identified patterns linking the Kellerman disappearance to 17 other missing persons cases across 6 states, all involving families or individuals who had discovered information that could threaten organized crime operations. The pattern suggested a systematic approach to eliminating threats that spanned decades and involved multiple criminal organizations. Most disturbing, the computer analysis revealed that Vincent Torino's organization had been connected, directly or indirectly, to 12 of the 17 cases. The evidence remained circumstantial, proximity in time and location rather than definitive proof. But the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Agent Reeves assembled a task force to investigate what appeared to be a decades-long campaign of murder and intimidation that had claimed dozens of lives across multiple jurisdictions. The Kellerman family represented just one data point in a criminal enterprise that eliminated threats with the efficiency of a business operation disposing of obsolete inventory. The task force's investigation revealed that Torino's organization had evolved far beyond its origins in illegal quarrying operations. By the 1990s, it controlled legitimate businesses worth hundreds of millions of dollars while maintaining criminal activities that generated untraceable income streams. The organization employed former military and intelligence personnel who brought professional expertise to activities that ranged from corporate espionage to contract assassination. However, Torino himself had aged into his 70s, and health problems were forcing him to delegate operational control to subordinates who lacked his tactical brilliance and strategic patience. FBI surveillance detected internal power struggles that suggested the organization might be vulnerable to pressure that would have been ineffective during Torino's prime. Agent Reeves coordinated with prosecutors to develop a comprehensive case that could finally bring Torino's organization to justice. The strategy involved simultaneous raids on dozens of properties, arrests of key personnel, and seizure of financial assets that would cripple the organization's ability to continue operating. The operation, codenamed Limestone, launched on a cold February morning in 1997, involving more than 200 federal agents conducting coordinated raids across 4 states. FBI teams executed search warrants on Torino's quarry, his legitimate businesses, and properties associated with known associates, hoping to finally gather evidence that would withstand legal challenges. The raids yielded massive amounts of evidence documenting criminal activities spanning 2 decades, but they also revealed the thoroughness with which Torino's organization had eliminated evidence of their most serious crimes. Financial records showed payments to individuals identified only by code names, encrypted communications referenced cleanup operations and permanent solutions, but nothing provided direct evidence linking the organization to specific murders or disappearances. Most frustrating, the raids failed to locate Vincent Torino himself. The aging crime boss had apparently anticipated law enforcement action and disappeared days before the operation commenced, leaving behind subordinates who faced federal charges but lacked knowledge of the organization's most sensitive operations. Torino's disappearance created a new mystery within the larger puzzle of his criminal empire. FBI agents suspected that he had fled to countries without extradition treaties, but financial analysis suggested that he might have simply relocated to another identity within the United States, using resources accumulated over decades of criminal activity to vanish as completely as his victims. The prosecution of Torino's subordinates revealed tantalizing glimpses of the organization's methods, without providing closure for families seeking answers about missing loved ones. Several defendants attempted to negotiate reduced sentences in exchange for information about unsolved cases, but their knowledge proved limited to operational details rather than the strategic decisions that determined victims' fates. The trial of Anthony Caruso, Torino's former security chief, provided the most detailed public account of how the organization eliminated threats. Caruso's testimony, delivered in exchange for witness protection, described a systematic approach to violence that treated murder as a business problem requiring professional solutions. When someone became a problem, Vincent had procedures, Caruso testified. First, they had try intimidation or bribery. If that didn't work, they had moved to more serious measures. But Vincent always said that the best way to handle problems was to make them disappear completely, so there wouldn't be evidence for investigations or families demanding answers. Caruso's testimony confirmed that the organization possessed capabilities for making people vanish without trace, but he claimed ignorance about specific cases, including the Kellerman disappearance. His knowledge was compartmentalized, limited to security operations rather than the broader scope of criminal activities that Torino controlled personally. The trials resulted in convictions for numerous defendants on charges ranging from racketeering to conspiracy to commit murder, but they failed to provide closure for families whose loved ones had disappeared into Torino's criminal empire. The organization's systematic approach to evidence elimination had proven effective in protecting its most serious secrets, even when law enforcement succeeded in dismantling its operational structure. Agent Reeves, now approaching retirement after a distinguished career, found herself no closer to answering the fundamental questions that had driven her investigation of the Kellerman case for nearly 2 decades. She knew what had happened. A family had discovered information that threatened criminal operations and had been eliminated to protect those secrets, but legal resolution remained beyond reach. The new millennium brought additional technological advances that offered fresh approaches to old cases. DNA databases expanded to include genetic profiles from millions of individuals, creating possibilities for matches that hadn't existed during early investigations. Agent Reeves arranged for reanalysis of biological evidence from the Kellerman case using techniques that promised unprecedented sensitivity and accuracy. The results provided both answers and new questions. DNA profiles from the unknown individuals found in the Kellerman house matched genetic material from crime scenes in 3 other states, confirming that the same people had been involved in multiple criminal operations. However, the individuals themselves remained unidentified, their genetic profiles failing to match anyone in law enforcement databases. More significantly, advanced DNA analysis revealed genetic material from all 5 Kellerman family members in locations that previous testing had missed. Traces of their DNA were found on clothing fibers embedded in the basement's concrete floor, suggesting that they had been held in the basement for some period before being moved elsewhere. The discovery that the family had been imprisoned in their own basement added a horrific dimension to their disappearance. Rather than being killed immediately, they had been kept alive in the most familiar place in their world, perhaps hoping for rescue that never came. The psychological torture of such captivity represented a level of cruelty that shocked even experienced investigators. Dr. Hendricks, now retired but still consulted on complex cases, updated her behavioral analysis to reflect the new evidence. The decision to hold the family in their basement suggests either logistical necessity or psychological sadism, she explained. Professional criminals usually prefer to move victims quickly to secure locations, so the extended captivity indicates unusual circumstances or individuals who derived satisfaction from prolonging their victims' suffering. The updated analysis suggested that whoever had taken the Kellerman family possessed both professional capabilities and personal motivations that extended beyond simple elimination of threats. The combination of efficiency and cruelty indicated criminals who had evolved beyond purely business-oriented violence into something more disturbing. As the investigation entered its 3rd decade, Agent Reeves faced retirement with the recognition that some cases defied resolution despite unlimited resources and dedication. The Kellerman family had vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only genetic traces and the enduring questions that haunted everyone who had worked on their case. The house on Elmwood Drive had changed ownership 3 more times, each family staying only briefly before moving elsewhere. Local real estate agents attributed the turnover to the property's tragic history, but neighbors whispered that the house itself felt wrong, as if the violence it had witnessed had left permanent scars on its foundation. Mrs. Patterson had passed away in 2003, taking with her the last direct connection to the family whose disappearance had shattered Millbrook's sense of security. Her house was purchased by a young couple with small children who remained unaware of the tragedy that had occurred next door until neighbors eventually shared the story that had become local legend. Vincent Torino's ultimate fate remained unknown. Law enforcement agencies across multiple countries had received reports of sightings, but none proved credible. The aging crime boss had vanished as effectively as his victims, leaving behind an organization that had been dismantled but secrets that remained intact. The investigation continued in the hands of new agents who inherited files, evidence, and the obsessive dedication that the case seemed to inspire in everyone who encountered it. Each generation of investigators brought fresh perspectives and new technologies to bear on evidence that had been examined countless times, hoping to find details that previous analysis had missed. By 2010, the Kellerman case had become a textbook example of how sophisticated criminals could exploit the limitations of the legal system to avoid consequences for their actions. Law enforcement academies used the case to illustrate both investigative techniques and the frustrating reality that some crimes remained beyond the reach of justice. Digital technology enabled new approaches to pattern analysis that revealed connections invisible to early investigations. Computer algorithms identified subtle relationships between seemingly unrelated cases, mapping criminal networks with precision that human analysts couldn't achieve. The Kellerman disappearance fit into patterns that suggested systematic elimination of threats by organizations that operated across multiple jurisdictions and decades. But pattern recognition, no matter how sophisticated, couldn't provide the specific evidence necessary for criminal prosecution or the answers that families needed for closure. The mathematical certainty that organized crime was responsible for dozens of disappearances remained legally insufficient without concrete proof linking specific individuals to particular crimes. Agent Rebecca Walsh, Agent Reeves' successor as lead investigator on the Kellerman case, brought new energy to an investigation that had consumed careers and defied resolution for over 3 decades. Walsh possessed the advantages of fresh perspective and advanced technology, but she also inherited the weight of expectations and the knowledge that some of law enforcement's most capable investigators had failed to solve the mystery that defined the case. The investigation was entering its 4th decade, when construction workers renovating the old Morrison house made a discovery that would finally reveal the truth about what had happened to the Kellerman family on that October night in. But until that moment, the case remained an open wound in the heart of American law enforcement. A reminder that some secrets are buried too deeply to be uncovered by conventional means. The silence that had protected Vincent Torino's organization for so long was about to be broken by the simple act of renovation, revealing horrors that had been hidden beneath the foundation of suburban normalcy for nearly half a century. The truth was waiting, patient as stone, for the moment when time and circumstance would finally bring justice to 5 innocent people whose only crime had been living next door to evil. October 13, 2024. Exactly 45 years to the day since the Kellerman family had vanished from their home on Elmwood Drive, dawned gray and drizzling in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The town had grown considerably since 1979, with strip malls and housing developments replacing the farmland that had once surrounded the original suburban neighborhoods. But Elmwood Drive remained largely unchanged, its tree-lined streets and modest homes still embodying the middle-class dreams that had drawn families like the Kellermans decades earlier. At 2047 Elmwood Drive, the house that had once belonged to the Morrison family was undergoing its most extensive renovation since being built in 1962. The current owners, David and Jennifer Hoffman, had purchased the property 6 months earlier with plans to transform it into their dream home. What they didn't know was that their contractor's excavation work was about to uncover secrets that had been buried for nearly half a century. Miguel Santos had been in construction for 28 years, long enough to encounter the unexpected in walls, basements, and foundations of older homes. But as his excavator's bucket scraped against something that clearly wasn't rock or clay in the Morrison basement, he felt the familiar chill that experienced contractors learn to associate with discoveries that would complicate their projects and potentially change lives forever. "David, you need to see this," Santos called to his client, his voice carrying an urgency that made David Hoffman abandon his morning coffee and hurry down the basement stairs. The excavator had uncovered what appeared to be a concrete vault built beneath the original basement floor, its existence completely hidden by layers of newer concrete and 50 years of accumulated debris. The vault measured approximately 8 feet by 12 feet, its walls constructed with the precision that suggested professional installation rather than amateur concealment. More disturbing, the concrete showed evidence of deliberate camouflage. Multiple layers of different concrete compositions indicated that the vault had been sealed, reopened, and sealed again several times over the decades, suggesting long-term use rather than a single burial event. David Hoffman stared at the exposed vault with growing unease, his mind processing implications that he didn't want to accept. His real estate agent had mentioned the neighborhood's tragic history, the family that had disappeared from the house next door in 1979. But no one had suggested that the Morrison property might be connected to that unsolved mystery. "Should we call the police?" Hoffman asked, though he already knew the answer. Santos nodded grimly. "We are not going any further without law enforcement present. I have seen enough crime shows to know that disturbing potential evidence is a serious mistake." The Millbrook Police Department responded within 20 minutes, dispatching Officer Patricia Coleman and Detective James Wright to assess the situation. Detective Wright, a 30-year veteran who had grown up hearing stories about the Kellerman disappearance, immediately recognized the potential significance of the discovery. "We are treating this as a crime scene until we know otherwise," Wright announced, establishing a perimeter around the Morrison property and calling for FBI assistance. "This location has been connected to an ongoing federal investigation, so we are bringing in resources with appropriate jurisdiction and expertise." Word of the discovery spread through Millbrook with the speed that characterized small communities when extraordinary events disrupted normal routines. By afternoon, news vans lined Elmwood Drive and FBI vehicles filled the Morrison driveway, transforming the quiet residential street into a hub of law enforcement activity that residents hadn't witnessed since. Agent Rebecca Walsh arrived from the FBI's Philadelphia field office within 3 hours of the initial discovery. Now in her 50s and recognized as one of the Bureau's leading experts on cold cases, Walsh had inherited the Kellerman investigation from Agent Diana Reeves and had spent 15 years pursuing leads that consistently led to dead ends and frustration. Walsh's first examination of the vault confirmed her worst fears and highest hopes simultaneously. The concrete construction demonstrated professional-level expertise in concealment, suggesting that whoever had built it possessed the resources and skills associated with organized crime operations. More significantly, the vault's location directly beneath the Morrison house placed it within 50 feet of the Kellerman family's backyard, close enough for covert transportation but distant enough to avoid detection during decades of investigation. FBI forensic specialists arrived from Washington, D.C. with equipment specifically designed for archaeological excavation of potential crime scenes. The process would be painstakingly slow, documenting every detail before disturbing any evidence that might have survived 45 years of concealment. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic anthropologist with extensive experience in mass grave excavations, supervised the careful removal of concrete layers that had sealed the vault. Each layer was photographed, measured, and analyzed for trace evidence that might provide information about when and how the vault had been accessed. As the final layer of concrete was removed, revealing the vault's interior, the assembled investigators experienced the mixture of triumph and horror that accompanied major breakthroughs in cases involving violent crime. The vault contained human remains, personal belongings, and documentation that would finally answer questions that had haunted law enforcement for nearly half a century. 5 human skeletons lay arranged within the vault with the precision that suggested respectful burial rather than hasty disposal. Each skeleton was positioned with care, hands folded, bodies aligned in parallel rows that indicated someone had taken time to treat the deceased with dignity despite the circumstances that had led to their deaths. Personal belongings found with the remains confirmed what investigators had suspected since discovering the vault. Ted Kellerman's wallet, still containing his driver's license and family photographs, lay beside the largest skeleton. Victoria's wedding ring remained on the finger bones of one of the smaller adult skeletons. Children's toys and clothing scraps provided heartbreaking evidence that entire families had been buried together in this hidden tomb. But the vault contained more than human remains and personal effects. A metal briefcase, sealed against moisture and deterioration, held documents that provided detailed records of the criminal operations that had led to the family's murder. Vincent Torino's organization had kept meticulous records of their activities, including documentation of threats eliminated and methods used to ensure permanent silence. Agent Walsh opened the briefcase with hands that trembled despite her professional experience with violent crime. Inside, manila folders contained typed reports, handwritten notes, and photographs that documented decades of systematic murder carried out by Torino's organization. The Kellerman file was labeled Millbrook, Engineering Problem, Resolved. The documents revealed that Ted Kellerman's engineering analysis of Titan Excavations equipment orders had been far more threatening to Torino's operations than investigators had realized. Ted had identified discrepancies that suggested the quarry was being used for large-scale weapons storage and smuggling operations, activities that generated millions of dollars in illegal profits for Torino's network. More damaging, Ted had prepared a formal report documenting his findings and planned to submit it to federal authorities the week following his family's disappearance. The report, found among the documents in the vault, contained engineering calculations and equipment analyses that would have exposed the true nature of Titan Excavations operations and triggered investigations that could have dismantled Torino's entire criminal empire. Vincent Torino's handwritten notes provided chilling insights into the decision-making process that had led to the family's murder. Engineer asks too many questions. One note read, "Family knows about equipment discrepancies. Permanent solution required before report submission." Additional notes detailed the surveillance operation that had monitored the Kellerman family for weeks before their abduction. Torino's organization had identified the family's routines, mapped their social connections, and planned their elimination with the thoroughness that characterized military operations rather than impulsive criminal acts. The documents revealed that the family had been taken from their home on the night of October 13, 1979, and transported to the Morrison basement vault that had been prepared specifically for their detention and eventual murder. They had been held alive for 3 days while Torino's organization searched their home and Ted's workplace for additional evidence of his investigation into Titan Excavation. Witness statements found in the vault indicated that the family had been interrogated about who else might possess knowledge of Ted's discoveries. The fact that they had been kept alive for days suggested that Torino wanted to ensure no other threats existed before eliminating the witnesses to his criminal operations. Perhaps most horrifically, the documents revealed that Vincent Torino himself had supervised the family's final hours, wanting to personally ensure that no evidence of their investigation survived. Handwritten notes described the children's terror and the parents' desperate attempts to protect them, providing details that made seasoned investigators weep with rage and sorrow. The vault also contained evidence of at least 6 other families who had been murdered by Torino's organization over a 20-year period, their remains interred in similar vaults across multiple states. The Kellerman family represented just one component of a systematic campaign of murder that had eliminated dozens of people who had discovered information threatening to organized crime operations. DNA analysis of the remains confirmed what the documentation had already revealed. The 5 skeletons belonged to Ted, Victoria, Jeremy, Melody, and Nathan Kellerman, finally providing closure to a case that had consumed thousands of hours of investigation and haunted everyone who had worked on it. Agent Walsh stood in the Morrison basement, surrounded by evidence that would finally bring justice to the Kellerman family, and felt the complex emotions that accompanied the resolution of cases that had defined careers and changed lives. The truth was more horrible than anyone had imagined, but it also provided answers that families and investigators had needed for 45 years. The documents in the vault provided evidence that prosecutors could use to pursue charges against surviving members of Torino's organization, many of whom were still alive and had assumed they would never face consequences for crimes committed decades earlier. Federal grand juries would be convened, indictments would be issued, and trials would finally provide legal resolution to cases that had seemed permanently beyond the reach of justice. More importantly, the families who had lost loved ones to Torino's organization would finally have answers about what had happened to their relatives and where their remains could be found. The vault's documentation included maps and descriptions of burial sites across 6 states, enabling recovery operations that would provide closure to families who had endured decades of uncertainty. The discovery also revealed Vincent Torino's ultimate fate, answering questions that had puzzled investigators since his disappearance in. According to documents found in the vault, Torino had died of cancer in 2003 while hiding in a remote cabin in northern Montana, taking his secrets to the grave and believing that his crimes would remain forever hidden. But Torino had underestimated the persistence of time and the determination of families who refused to accept that their loved ones could vanish without explanation. The vault that was supposed to hide his crimes forever had become a tomb that preserved evidence of his guilt with the precision of an archaeological site. Dr. Foster's analysis of the remains revealed details about the family's final days that provided both closure and additional anguish for everyone involved in the investigation. Physical evidence confirmed that the family had been killed by gunshot wounds, but the positioning of the bodies and the care taken in their burial suggested that someone in Torino's organization had felt remorse about murdering children. The investigation of the vault continued for weeks, with FBI specialists cataloging every piece of evidence and cross-referencing documentation with unsolved cases across multiple jurisdictions. The discovery represented one of the largest breakthroughs in organized crime investigation in decades, providing evidence that would enable prosecution of criminal activities spanning half a century. Media attention intensified as details of the discovery became public, with news outlets across the country covering the story of a family's murder that had been hidden for 45 years. The Kellerman case became a symbol of persistence in criminal investigation, demonstrating that some truths remain hidden until time and circumstance finally reveal them. Mrs. Henderson, who had purchased Mrs. Patterson's house and become the neighborhood's unofficial historian, organized a memorial service for the Kellerman family that drew hundreds of attendees from across the region. Former neighbors, investigators, and family members gathered to honor 5 innocent people whose lives had been stolen by criminals who believed they could murder with impunity. The service was held in Millbrook's largest church, with photographs of the family displayed at the altar and flowers donated by community members who wanted to demonstrate that the Kellermans had not been forgotten despite the decades that had passed since their disappearance. Agent Walsh delivered a eulogy that honored both the family's memory and the investigators who had never stopped searching for answers. Ted, Victoria, Jeremy, Melody, and Nathan Kellerman were ordinary people living ordinary lives until evil intruded into their world. Walsh said, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years spent pursuing justice for the family. Their deaths were senseless, but their memory has inspired generations of investigators to never give up the search for truth, no matter how long it takes. The Kellerman family was finally laid to rest in Millbrook's Fairview Cemetery, their graves marked with a monument donated by the FBI Agents Association. The inscription read, "The Kellerman family, taken too soon, never forgotten, justice at last." The cemetery plot overlooked the town where they had lived and died, providing a peaceful final resting place for souls who had endured decades of hidden violence. Federal prosecutors announced indictments against 17 surviving members of Torino's organization, charging them with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The trials would be among the largest organized crime prosecutions in Pennsylvania history, finally holding accountable criminals who had believed themselves beyond the reach of justice. The convictions that followed provided legal closure to not only the Kellerman case, but also to dozens of other murders and disappearances that had remained unsolved for decades. Families across multiple states finally learned what had happened to their loved ones and where their remains could be found, bringing an end to uncertainty that had tormented them for generations. The Morrison house was demolished shortly after the completion of the FBI investigation, its foundation too tainted by the horrors it had concealed to ever again serve as a family home. The Hoffmans donated the property to the city of Millbrook, which converted it into a memorial garden honoring victims of violent crime. The Kellerman house next door was purchased by the Millbrook Historical Society and converted into a museum dedicated to unsolved crimes and the families affected by them. The house's rooms now contain displays about criminal investigation techniques, victim advocacy, and the importance of never giving up the search for truth and justice. Agent Walsh retired shortly after the Kellerman case's resolution, her career culminating in the breakthrough that had eluded investigators for 45 years. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting families of missing persons, using her experience to help others navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges that accompany unexplained disappearances. The case's resolution also led to renewed investigation of other cold cases from the 1970s and 1980s, with law enforcement agencies applying new technologies and perspectives to evidence that had been examined countless times. The Kellerman breakthrough demonstrated that persistence and technological advancement could overcome even the most sophisticated criminal concealment efforts. Today, Elmwood Drive looks much as it did in 1979, with mature trees shading modest homes and children playing in yards that echo with laughter rather than fear. But residents understand that their neighborhood witnessed both the worst of human evil and the best of human persistence, serving as a reminder that justice may be delayed, but cannot be permanently denied. The memorial garden, where the Morrison house once stood, has become a place of reflection for visitors from across the country who come to honor the Kellerman family's memory and to contemplate the price of innocence in a world where evil sometimes triumphs temporarily, but never permanently. Bronze plaques tell the story of 5 lives stolen by greed and violence, but also of the dedication and persistence that finally brought their killers to justice. The Kellerman case stands as proof that some secrets cannot remain buried forever, that truth has a way of emerging from even the deepest concealment, when time and determination combine to overcome the forces that seek to hide it. 5 innocent people were murdered by criminals who believed they could commit perfect crimes, but they underestimated the power of love, memory, and the human refusal to accept that evil can triumph permanently over good. On quiet evenings, when twilight settles over Millbrook and the Memorial Garden's flowers catch the last rays of sunlight, visitors sometimes feel the presence of the family whose memory the space honors. Ted, Victoria, Jeremy, Melody, and Nathan Kellerman have finally found peace, their story complete and their killers held accountable for crimes that were hidden for 45 years, but could not remain secret forever. The investigation that began on an October morning in 1979 with an elderly neighbor's concern about unusual silence next door had finally concluded with the revelation that some truths are worth waiting decades to discover. Justice had been delayed, but it had not been denied, proving that persistence and dedication can overcome even the most sophisticated criminal attempts to hide the truth. The Kellerman family's legacy lives on in the investigators who refuse to close cold cases, the families who never stop searching for missing loved ones, and the communities that remember that ordinary people living ordinary lives deserve protection from the evil that sometimes intrudes into peaceful neighborhoods and changes everything forever. Their story serves as both a warning about the persistence of evil and a testament to the power of good people who refuse to allow darkness to triumph permanently over light. In the end, love proved stronger than hate, truth more powerful than concealment, and justice more enduring than the criminals who believed they could murder with impunity. The Kellerman family had finally come home.